Now, we're going to be talking about those latest migration figures that came out yesterday afternoon and some extraordinary figures. These are figures from the Office for National Statistics, specifically for England, and showing that England's population will soar by more than 3 million in the next 10 years to almost 60 million. And that's according to the official forecast. The headcount for London alone is expected to touch almost 10 million, an increase of 750,000 in that period. Now, it's not births that are fueling most of that growth. It's the arrival of more people from abroad. And the forecasting is for a boom, even with the number of EU migrants after Brexit going down. Now, of course, the predictions were that, of course, there'd be a mass outflow of EU migrants from the country after the Brexit vote, ahead of Brexit, but we're certainly not seeing that at all. It's absolutely continuing. And fascinatingly, Romanians are now the second most numerous non-British population by nationality, now numbering 411,000, ahead of the Irish. The Poles, of course, large numbers here as well. But should we have more immigration or less immigration? We're constantly told we're massive shortage of skills, whether it's in the health service or in other skilled areas. But do we want more or less when it comes to people coming from abroad to carry out that work? Well, let's talk about that with two people who are very much engrossed in this battle. Alp Mehmet is Vice Chair of Migration Watch, and James McGrory is Executive Director of Open Britain and worked on, of course, the Remain campaign and joins us now. Good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Good morning. Alp, let me come to you first. These figures show that despite a lot of the, I suppose it was regarded as doom mongering to a certain extent from the Remain campaign, but something that many Leave voters would have cheered. We thought there would be a fall in the number of migrants to the EU, and in terms of also the number of people leaving the country as a result of the Brexit vote, but that doesn't appear to be the case.
Indeed, and we always said it wouldn't be the case, of course. It's not so much the numbers in themselves, but the speed with which this has happened. If you may recall that in 2013, before constraints were lifted off Romanians, Bulgarians coming here to work.
That was the Eastern European nations that
Indeed,
all arrived en masse.
That was only 4 or 5 years ago. There were 94,000 Romanians in this country. There are now 411,000. That's a massive, massive increase, 25% in 1 year. And that is what concerns me more than anything, frankly, is the speed with which this has happened, and that is not about to stop.
And why is it the speed that bothers you? What is it about the speed that is concerning?
Well, people need a roof over their heads. People come here, they need medical attention. Not all of them, some do. People need schools in time. Children come along. Are we really going to, in even 10 years' time, are we going to produce the schools, the teachers, all that we need by way of our services for those who are coming here and who are going to have children by that time? No, we're not. All that does is add pressure on. And it's the change that is seen by people in their own community that is so rapid that worries them, that concerns them.
Okay.
And that is what I worry about.
James McGrory, are you concerned at all at the numbers, at the scale, or at the speed? Are any concerns about public service pressures?
The numbers and the scale and the speed are all dependent on government's abilities to then deal with it. Where Alp's got a very valid point is that successive governments, and this is governments of all colours, have benefited from the benefits of immigration, i.e. the boost to our economy, people doing jobs that we need to do, not least in places like our health service. But then they haven't necessarily invested in things like housing in particular that you need when you have an increasing population, and people then have very legitimate concerns about the effect that it has on the pressure on public services. I think a lot of this debate on immigration will get a lot better and people will be a lot more comfortable with it if governments, as I say, reap the benefits, but then used it to invest in the infrastructure and the public services you need for a larger population.
But you say reap the benefits. Now, there's no question at all that immigration, just on a smaller scale, from countries in Western Europe, where you've got skilled migrants coming over, doing these banking jobs and lawyers and doctors and the like, that does provide an economic benefit to the population. But in terms of a net benefit from people arriving from Romania, a very, very poor country. I've said a Romanian in my family. I'm not anti-Romanian at all. people. But from people coming from much poorer countries with very, very low skill levels, they're not going to be net contributors, but they are going to need somewhere to live. They need to have a local GP. They need to send their children to school. That does put a lot of extra pressure on public spending. You talk about governments benefiting. How do local people benefit from there being another extra family needing those public services and competing for them for housing?
Well, we have a lot of unskilled jobs in this country that need doing. Talk to anybody in the agricultural industry, in the hospitality industry. These are, I'm afraid, hugely well-paid jobs, but they need doing. I mean, the farming industry is a cracking example in that we want to grow food in this country. We want to pick it and then we want to eat it on our dinner table. Now, I'm afraid that the vast majority of that work is done by migrants from countries.
Maybe they need to pay people better to do that work, and then British people would do it.
Well, that's always the argument put forward. But, if you do that, then you'll increase the price of food on people's plates. Do people want to pay more for their food so that they can pay people more wages?
But we could pay less in tax to subsidise housing benefit for people who aren't working. I mean, there's a trade-off, isn't there? Currently, we are subsidising those low-paid jobs through our taxes, aren't we? And we're doing that for people, whether they're from Britain or from the EU.
Well, we heavily subsidise our agricultural industry, full stop. I mean, that's just a fact of life. And a lot of people have blamed that on the EU, but the government's committed to moving forward with the same subsidies, even when we're outside of the EU. And I just don't subscribe to this idea that there are lots and lots of people queuing up to do hard labour in our fields and pick fruit, and they're being denied the opportunity to do so by Remainers.
Alp Mehmet, do you want to come back on that point? James McGrory says, look, actually, people say they don't want low-skilled immigrants. The polling's very clear. People are quite happy to have high-skilled immigrants, but not low-skilled. What do you say to James's point?
James, I'm very sorry, but that's absolutely no excuse for mass immigration. Are you saying to me that if you want a bowl of strawberries on your table, that you've got to go to Romania or wherever to get the labour to come here and live their lives for forevermore in order to provide you with those strawberries? That is just absolute nonsense.
Well, who's going to do that work then, Alp?
We can. If you pay enough, and the Migration Advisory Committee itself said that if you pay enough, you will get the workers. There's plenty of spare capacity. I know we've got, in theory, full employment, but there's anything up to 5 million people, frankly, who could work more if the jobs were there. But where employers can bring in people at cheaper rates, lower rates, they're going to continue to do it. Pay more, change the conditions, and you will find the workers.
OK, James McGrory, can I also bring in the point that Alp made a bit earlier about the people being concerned about the change in their local communities? In 5 London boroughs, more than half of the population is now from abroad. Newham, Brent, Westminster, and in Hounslow and in Harrow. So a lot of central London boroughs where more than half the people weren't born in this country. That is an astonishing statistic, even for a very international city. Now, that may just mean you get some lovely, Italian delicatessens and Polish, bars or whatever. But the reality is, for local people, often it does mean that they can. That phrase, a phrase people have used and get angry about, but they can feel strangers in their own hometown or own home city. Do you understand when people are concerned that they feel that they're sort of being pushed out of their own homes?
Of course I do. And, so look, as someone who's London born and bred, I've lived here all my life. I'm incredibly proud of the cosmopolitan city that I grew up in. And, I'm going to shock you now with a name like James McGrory. My family aren't local born and bred either. They're immigrants themselves from Ireland. London has always been a city that's thrived on immigration. I totally understand that people worry about pace of change in their communities, but I think London has been undoubtedly enriched by people coming from all parts of the world to work here, to make a contribution to our society, to work in our health service. You're more likely in London, I find, to be treated by someone from another country than you are to be behind them in the queue when you go to the doctor.
Well, you can say that, but again, we're told that our NHS can't possibly survive without foreign workers. Well, Germany runs a much more efficient, much better health service and has a tiny percentage of foreign workers. They've just had this wild, mad, crazy idea of training up all the people who want to be nurses and doctors in their country to be nurses and doctors instead of having a limit on them and importing people from abroad. It's a mad idea. It might catch on.
Well, that is if that's what people want to do, train up lots of doctors and nurses, you've got to, that is a big task. You can't just train a doctor overnight. It takes years and it takes a huge amount of investment. If we want to do that, then governments have to get real, start now, and in 6 or 7 years, we can start to see the benefits of introducing that policy. Right. But the idea that between those 6 and 7 years, we can just say, oh, we'll have some British doctors is just literally impossible.